Hello all, and a very warm welcome to each one of you for this panel discussion on building the digital next competencies. We are very privileged to have with us today for this discussion Suchismita Burman, our CHRO, popularly addressed as Suchi, Saswat Swain, the delivery head for DX, and Balaji Raghunathan, who heads competency building for DX. This discussion will be divided into three segments. In the first segment, we will look at the broad landscape of building digital next competencies and key challenges in the current environment. In the second segment, we will evaluate how the trend of learning has been shifting in recent times. And in the final segment, we will focus on our preparations and roadmap for building digital next competencies. We will open the last 10 to 15 minutes for all of you to address your questions to the panel. Do please make a note of your questions as the discussion progresses and feel free to post it on the chat window. Based on the time and bandwidth, we will attempt to answer as many questions as possible that come into us. Before I launch into the first segment, I would just like to start off with a very simple but impactful definition of competency, since it's a term that has been so broadly thrown around. And that definition is simply this, that a competency is a combination of observable and measurable knowledge, skills, and abilities that contribute to enhanced employee performance and ultimately result in organizational success. The beauty of this definition, as I view it, is that, like I mentioned earlier, competencies is a term that's quite broadly thrown around. But when we bring into the fold or into the mix the observable and the measurable aspect of it, when we bring into the mix how it helps you as an individual, how it helps me as an individual to enhance our performance, and ultimately all with the purpose of contributing to the organization's success, I think that helps us to view it from a more well-rounded perspective. We heard Sudeep this morning, for those of you who are on the call, and how he addressed all of us in terms of the exciting opportunities that we have both contributed to as a business, as well as what is on the horizon for us. We also heard Paul sharing his views on how the landscape has been shifting, especially when we consider the current times that we are in, when we consider some of the challenges that our customers are facing, and more importantly, some of the challenges and the need for us to really look at it now from our customers' perspective as well. So with these, with this background and with this introduction, I would like all of you to pay close heed to the points that are being discussed today, raise your questions, and try to make this as meaningful and participative for you, and try to take away certain key learnings in terms of how you can contribute now to this exciting journey that we have already embarked on. So without further ado, let me launch into the first segment on the current landscape and challenges. Balaji, can I request you to kickstart the discussion by giving us your view on the DX competency landscape, where we are, where we aspire to be, and some of the challenges that you see, please?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, Balaji.
Sure. Thank you, Ritesh. So the way we look at digital is like it's a marriage of 4 different Ds. That is essentially the design, the data, the domain, and the delivery. Delivery is the delivery of experiences, basically. So if we look at just these 4 elements itself, you have a lot of change. So if you look at the design, now everything is all about the design thinking and the design-led delivery experience. That's the first part. So people actually need to be skilled on how to do design thinking, how to ideate through design thinking, and then come up with the prototypes. And it's about test and learn approach. So how do we transform from taking the requirements over a longer period of time and then starting to build something, and then actually deliver to a customer after 3 months to 6 months to something where the customer wants to see something within 1 or 2 weeks. So it is more show and tell now than what it was before. So that's the first transformation we need to look at. Then from a data perspective, there are 3-4 different tracks of data. So what is what is a data scientist? That itself is like very unclear for most people. is a data scientist somebody who does algorithms, or is a data scientist somebody who does the data infrastructure or does the data analysis? So essentially, like, we have different roles even in the data space. Like, you have data engineer, you have data analyst, you have somebody who can do a data visualization or what we call as business story, and then we also have the people who can actually code algorithms. So that's the data scientist. So that's the second aspect. The third aspect is from a domain perspective. There is nothing digital without a domain knowledge. So when we say digital, it's actually business technology. So how do we look at, embedding what we know from a business perspective to something which can be delivered to the customer? How do we capture that domain elements? How do we, capture the domain elements into a domain model? So that is the other skill what is needed. And then finally, it's how do you deliver? You have to deliver it through mobile or web, or it's going to be omni-channel. So I think that is the four mixes we have to look at, and each of them have their own technology. So if we look at it from the three main challenges, we have the heterogeneity of technology. Even from a data perspective, you would actually have a challenge on whether you should do data visualization that's going to be on Power BI, Tableau, or it's going to be on the older style, SSRS, MSBI. So that's the other challenge from a just from a data perspective. And then on top of it, you have big data. In big data, you have to have the capability to look at the entire AWS landscape, the data landscape, or it's going to be even Azure, and Google Cloud is also getting a lot of adoption. So that's the heterogeneity just from a data perspective. And then from a domain perspective, we again have either it's CPG or manufacturing or the banking or the retail aspect or the travel and hospitality aspect. So whether it's the supply chain kind of aspects or whether it's the customer focused kind of aspect. And then from the CX perspective, you have the CRMs, which is either Salesforce or Microsoft, and then you actually have the mobile development or the web development, or you also have the marketing automation piece. So essentially, like, what we are looking at is the heterogeneity of technology. How do we enable our employees to address a heterogeneity of technology at the speed of evolution? Now, the shelf life of every technology is probably about not more than 2 to 3 years. So if we look at 10 years back, Java was supposed to be the one. Java was supposed to be the king of anything to do with development. Now it's largely about JavaScript and JavaScript frameworks. There are so many frameworks over JavaScript. So how do we address people to be competent on the evolving technology space? And the third is finally, how do we move from an agile, from a waterfall to an agile model? How do we go from 3 month long releases to something like 1 or 2 week releases or even daily releases? So I think these are basically the challenges which we need to address.
Sure. Thank you, Balaji. Shashwat, could you help us to understand, especially in these times, how are you seeing the customers' needs evolve, and what are the predominant shifts that you are seeing, in the pre and post-COVID scenario? Paul did touch upon some of it in his talk earlier, but we'd like to hear from you, Shashwat.
Sure. Thanks, Ritesh. Balaji, thanks for that. What I'm going to talk about is it's actually quite interesting the way I have seen this evolve. And if you remember, there is a very famous Steve Jobs quote: "Customers don't know what they want," and that is something that that is more and more evident, specifically during these times. And as everybody is aware, we have been talking digital for more than the last 5 years, ever since digital transformation, the buzzword started getting interest. Uh, but I think finally, over the last 2 years, there is some definition, some standardization that is coming into what really digital means. And when I say what digital means, it's not a term that how a system integrator or an analyst defines, but actually that term, how it is actually important for the enterprise, how digital can help the enterprise transform the business. So that is the understanding that is sinking in. That's what we see across most of our customers. And uh, and when that starts to sink in, that term starts to sink in, and organizations are or enterprises are very clear about uh, how they can transform their business using certain digital transformation themes, using a set of technologies. When that starts to sink in, it is really defining the opportunities, or how a partner like ourselves, or a system integrator, or a services player like ourselves can actually participate in the journey. And I go back to what I said, when we say the customers don't know what they want. Yes, customers have now understood what digital is, how it can assist in their journey for evolving the enterprise. But then comes to the part, okay, what do we do next, right? So, and if you look at the digital space, it is huge, it is vast. So what to pick, which technologies to use where, which business theme can be associated, can be realized by what kind of technology. So that is where most of the customer are there in their stage of evolution, and that in turn is essentially this is the evolution that is happening from a customer landscape, and as a cascade impact, it is also bringing in a very different set of demands to partners like us. And why I say that, uh, first of all, you are just not somebody who brings in a technology play. Okay, you tell me what has to be done, I will do it for you. It is more getting more consultative, where you need to partner and really shape the roadmap for the customer, be an equal partner in defining the roadmap, picking the technology, all of that. So that is how the stakes have changed, and this is the evolving customer need. Now, when you go back to the pre-COVID and post-COVID times, and here comes the interesting part, where we uh, in the pre-COVID times, it was very very organization driven, right? So there used to be a organization posts, training requirements, organization or a company arranging training. But now, with the rapidly changing landscape, it becomes impossible, and the onus is actually shifting back to all of us to remain as contemporary as possible. And from a company standpoint, yeah, we can do one, two, three different things, at a large, at a scale level. But is that really going to adequate? And if you go back to how the customer needs have evolved to become more consultative, to have as wide a view as possible, so that one can pick the various nuggets that is out there and see, here is the most suitable, most innovative solution for your needs. Then just relying on a training to be served is not really going to be adequate. So that is where the more interesting part is, you are expanding that ecosystem by self-learning, and the organization can only facilitate. So that is a shift that I'm seeing. And again, going back to the customer needs standpoint, uh, suddenly one interesting thing that has happened is, like all of us here, and if you look at our work from home routines, uh, it has really transformed the way we are working, and we suddenly seems to have a lot more time, uh, because you are not going out, you're sitting there at the desk, and suddenly there is a lot of time. And exactly the same thing is also happening at the customer side, right? And the customers have started to realize, for certain skills areas which were traditionally, used to go to the local market, proximity, getting somebody from the market, bringing them on, that is not really required, because things are, it doesn't really, location now really doesn't matter. So lot of these different types of skills which traditionally used to be under Western or tier one dominance, that is kind of getting opened up for you, for everyone, and that is giving rise to a very varied set of demands which are coming our way. And again, to react to that kind of a demand, and this is going to continue, this is the trend which has started. That again means expanding and keeping on learning newer and contemporary adjacent skills. Although the core can remain the same, but having a very adjacent and overlapping skills, expanding your landscape. That is something which is becoming very critical. And two examples. If you look at one of our key customers, where we are using, doing some data engineering work, the ask is not only for people who understand how to do ETL, but they must also understand, at least the broad contours of how a data warehousing project works. In addition, because they're working in an agile environment, they also need to do, quality assurance at a unit level in a very structured manner. Another example where we are implementing a service center application. The customer ask is to not only tell us, okay, this is what we need, we deliver. Now the expectation is actually for us to go and help them build the business case by telling them what are the benefits that they have realized, and helping them to build the business case for continuing the roadmap. So these are two examples. Over to you, Ritesh.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Saswat. Suchi, in order to, and maybe I will, given the time that we've got, what I will try to do, Suchi, is also possibly bring in your inputs from the next segment into this one. So what we would like to hear from you, Suchi, is, basis what Saswat has mentioned in terms of the evolving customer needs, the kind of roadmap that Balaji spelled out in terms of the vision for all of us. What, in your view, Suchi, are some of those initiatives that ITC Infotech is taking as an organization? For example, we now have all been, in some form or fashion, been exposed to the role-based organization that we are transitioning into. And what I would like you to do, Suchi, if possible, is also bring in some of the inputs that I was actually planning to ask you in the next segment in terms of how you see this whole area of competency development now evolving, especially given the kind of expectations that are there in the times that we are in. Over to you, Suchi.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, I think a huge round of applause to all of you, and especially the leadership team, to have a forum for these conversations, right? Because I believe as an organization culture, right, if you're talking about a role-based organization, competencies, all of this, I think change can happen only if you start talking about it, because that actually drives awareness. And through awareness, you actually try and go through the phase of acceptance and owning that change, because it's only when you own that process, when it becomes meaningful for each of us, that the change really delivers the results that all of us are talking about, right? So I think it's absolutely something that all of us should continue doing, and doing it regularly. So great conversation, and thank you for that. So to your question, right? I think from a people standpoint, and as always, this fundamental does not change, that it is always everything that you try and do on the people side of it is to be able to facilitate the goals of the business. Now, keeping in the context of what we are trying to do in our digital part of the business and the organization, I think the transition of the role-based organization actually plays to the strength of what is it that we're trying to build as a business. Now, what does a role-based organization really do? A role-based organization actually focuses on efficiency, focuses on an outcome, focuses on performance, right? It allows people to come together as agile teams, as a self-directed team, to be able to get to the outcome that the business needs. And that reflects in the way you think about your roles, you think about your measures, you think about your targets, right? That's one element of it. The other part of it is actually translates to how do you see your own responsibilities, correct? And that's where the learning part of it becomes extremely important. And when I talk about learning, I don't mean only the technical or the behavioral learning, because in my mind, I think it's a fusion, right? Because when you have different roles and different expectations and the way, and I was taking some notes as Balaji and Saswat were talking, let's talk about the customer expectations of consultative approach, a partnership, participating in creating the roadmap, right? You can't necessarily do that if you don't have people start thinking in that direction, right? Let's take the role of, say, for example, a data architect. And we talked about, say, for example, a data scientist, and what Balaji mentioned about that definition itself is so important, correct? And this is where I think the people practice or the HR part of it becomes extremely important, to be able to create a framework to define the technical and the behavioral competencies in the roles that we are in. And we don't have that. And that's something that we are trying to do. And most importantly, then when you think about the learning requirements, it's to be able to break that into small bite-sized information. And as we all know, the technology part of the learning enablement is here to stay. The problem is we still go back on instructor-led training, right? And as a result, what needs to happen is, how do we necessarily define the outcome that we want to get through virtually led training interventions, which are self-paced learnings as well, right? Because those options are available. It was always available to people. But what the focus has to be, and that's where each of our ownership really lies, saying, what do I necessarily want to get out of that learning intervention, right? So if I look at it from a DX standpoint, where are my big bets versus where's my core? And essentially, if I look at the core versus the big bets, necessarily, why is it that I'm investing? And individuals who are on the call, I think what you should think about saying, if I'm really investing in learning in certain skill areas, how do I necessarily use that in terms of, if I look at my customer requirements, if I think about my roles, how do I necessarily gain the most of it? So all HR processes, communication, policies have to be geared towards that, be it reimbursement of certification, correct? So it's not just a plain certification and hence a reimbursement out of that, but focusing, saying, where do I need the certification? How do I necessarily get it deployed? How do I show the ROI on it? And obviously the cost benefit of it comes in from a reimbursement or a policy support standpoint. That's the way I would summarize it in a nutshell, Ritesh. So role-based organization facilitated through virtual learning, which is outcome driven, owned by people with a very clear understanding of core and the big bets, and how do I necessarily link it to a business outcome, what my customer expectations are. And I think more ownership by the managers and individual themselves to know what is it that they're after, and work with the leaders and HR to make that happen.
Thank you, Suchi. Thanks for also helping to pull in some of the inputs from the next segment, which we are now getting into. Which and Shashwat, I'd like you to come in here, please, and just building on some of the points that Suchi just mentioned. How can you comment on the process shift that is expected now, from a more possibly an earlier, a more theoretical way of approaching competency development into more practical ways of learning? And can you also comment, Shashwat, on some of the changes that you're seeing, in this journey that we are on, considering where we want to be, some of the points that you yourself covered in the prior segment. What are some of the changes and the trends that you're seeing when it comes to, for example, project knowledge management? Could you please share your views with us?
Yeah, so two parts to it. I talked about learning in my prior segment. See, I am increasingly seeing, and I would like to re-emphasize the impetus, or really the criticality of creating a learning mindset. It is absolutely imperative, and this is where the emphasis goes back to self-learning, uh, using the variety of information, the courses, the technology that is available. And if you look at most of the, if you really talk about the technical training, uh, the amount of hands-on and the structure that it provides is amazing. And it is not only theoretical, you're not only reading about concepts, but you are actually getting an environment where you can actually practice what you're doing. And we tried about a couple of months back, we tried something to run a snowflake program. And it was purely driven uh, by self-learning, self-motivation, and we picked up about 30 people, and that has been a pretty good success. So we have close to 5 architects who have certified. It's all self-certified without even spending a penny. It is only their time. The courseware was available for free. So if you extrapolate from there, it is all changing the mindset to self-learn, self-improve. The the means and ways are out there. So that is the first change that process shift, as you may call it. That is something that is changing, and yes, people are adopting it. People are starting to adopt it, but I think that will become mainstream. So that is one thing. From a knowledge project management, knowledge management perspective, I think that is where it all, it is it's not a new phenomenon. I don't see the fundamentals are still the same, but from a knowledge management standpoint, again the ways and means to manage knowledge is changed, right? And if you look at a typical project execution, uh, uh, we there are instances where certain large-scale tech companies are completely, getting rid of email, and they're working through a collaboration platform like Slack or even Teams. So that is a fundamental change in mindset, and these are very powerful collaboration platforms which lets you communicate, collaborate, as well as manage the knowledge repository. So yes, tools are playing a larger and larger role. The technology has been out there, but I think the adoption and embracing this set of tools is where we need to go. With us, OT.
Sure. Thank you, Shashwat. Thank you for that. Yeah, like Shashwat, like you rightly mentioned, and tying into what Suchi said in the last segment, I think the shift now is on a learning mindset and ensuring that we take that ownership and that initiative to continuously self-learn if we have to evolve with the times. Balaji, in this context of the changing shifts or the trends that we see evolving in competency development. Can I ask you to comment, Balaji, on some of the more popular platforms? I know it's competency development today has become very technology driven. So we hear buzzwords like gamification, leaderboards. Can you share your views and thoughts, Balaji, on some of these concepts that have possibly been around for a while, but how we are seeking to possibly build on these platforms that are now available to us? Balaji, are you there? You might be speaking on mute.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So like what Suchi mentioned, the shift now is from the instructor-led training to e-learning, and like what Shashwat was mentioning, that the focus is now more on self-learning. So if you look at most of the e-learning kind of platforms, they are all driven by how to encourage people to do more courses. How do you get them to actually involve themselves more, like how they play some computer games. So basically it's more into how do you develop it more like a leaderboard. So we are looking at plural site. We already have about some 63 people onboarded onto plural site. So in plural site, we have given them a kind of mandatory training course based on their roles, and then for people who are up to the middle management, more of them would be in terms of how do they code in a particular language. And when it comes to people who are in the mid-level cadre, it's more about how do they think and take a decision. It's more about whether you want to do architecture, or how do you decide on a particular technology. And Plural Site is an interesting platform. So you have different types of courses, and it's not that you get access only to mandatory set of courses, but you can also look at it from the other courses. You just search, and then you get the list of all the courses what you need for a particular category, and then it's up to you. It's about your self-learning pace. We are looking at somewhere around some 80 hours of the e-learning spend time, what we expect the people to complete. But yeah, I mean, it's up to you on your own self pace. I think people have time till October 31st to complete, and again, you have different ways of knowing how much you have actually uh, gained from that particular course. So you have a kind of pre-course and a post-course kind of assessment where you get to know how much you've actually learned. So I think that's how gamification is getting embedded into platforms. We are also looking at other platforms apart from Pluralsight. We are looking at partner-led platforms like what Microsoft can provide. And then again, digital is incomplete without an ecosystem kind of play. So we are actually working with a lot of startups to actually, gain access to their particular technologies and, build solutions around those startups. So in fact, like I think about 10 to 15 people have got trained on haptic. They know how to create chatbots, not only from a user experience perspective, but to train the bots, to also integrate it with different other systems. So basically what we have is a mix of, partner-led training, e-learning training, just-in-term learning, and basically what Suchi was mentioning about bite-sized learning and continuous learning. So that's what we have. We are also looking at one more platform. I don't want to reveal the name until we sign, an agreement with them. That's actually interesting because that's more in terms of long-term courses. So you take up a specific set of courses, then you get certified, you get a degree. So that is something which we are exploring. And then we are also looking at something which is outcome based, which means that before I get into a project, I need some 20 people certified or 20 people, selected on a particular technology by a customer. We get the people trained on that particular platform by that particular, learning platform instructor, all, digitally enabled. The people would have access to, an environment to play around that technology, and then they also get a kind of assessment score, and then after that they are actually, enabled to attend the customer interviews. So I think that's a different kind of model also which we are exploring. So essentially, if I look at it, we have Pluralsight, we have the partner-led either haptic or even Microsoft, and then we are also looking at another platform from a learning perspective. Oh, dude.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Balaji, for that. That was quite informative and encouraging for all of us to know that the organization, invests where we believe our priorities are, and we walk the talk. And these are the various platforms that we are trying to enable for all our employees. Balaji, I'd like you to just stay on that thought, because as we move into our last segment, can I ask you to elaborate, continuing on where you left off, on some of our key focus areas for skilling, given the priorities that we have that have been outlined by Saswat and Paul and Sudeep in the earlier segments? Could you help us to understand some of our key focus areas for skilling, please?
Sure. So what we have done is we have actually divided our focus areas into a matrix kind of structure, which means that along the column you have different COEs. So you have a customer experience COE, you have a data COE, you have a planning and intelligent planning COE, and then you have what is called as the digital foundation. So digital foundation is more about something which you need across any of the COEs. So that could be about application security, or it could be about integration. And that's along the columns. Now, along the rows, what we have done is we call it as the core and big bet uh, and the digital next kind of categories. So core is where we expect about 60% of our revenues to come from. That's largely the areas where we have, a very strong pipeline, or we already have a lot of projects where people are already deployed in. So the core, for example, in the customer experience space would probably be around SFDC and Microsoft Dynamics, and some of the mobile app development platforms. And when it comes to data, it's largely either Azure-based big data, or the AWS-based big data, or some of the data visualization technologies, and MSBA essentially. And then again, When it comes to intelligent planning, that's largely Anaplan. Now, when it comes to actually the big bet, we are taking a big bet on Snowflake. So we are expecting a lot of opportunities for us. That's what Saswat is also talking about. That we went and trained about 30 people, and we already have 5 architects who are experts in Snowflake. So we are expecting Snowflake to take us into bigger areas, and that's one of our big bet. Of course, we also have data science. Data science is already a part of core, but a lot of new things like SageMaker, all these are coming in. We also have Azure ML. We are having ML Ops. So all these we are actually looking at from a big bets perspective in the data space. Now again in the customer experience space, we have Session M as our big bet, especially in the loyalty management, and all the integration aspects we are putting it under the big bet. So especially we are betting big on MuleSoft, given that Salesforce has acquired MuleSoft and we are a big partner for Salesforce. So we are looking at MuleSoft based integration. So that's one of our big bet. And then again, the digital next is all about our ecosystem partners. So we have partnerships with what I mentioned earlier, that's Haptic. And then we also have this new data science platform that's called BDB. So that's the those are the partners whom we are betting big on. I mean, that's more in terms of the digital next aspect. So I think that's how we have structured our training, and basically it's all aligned with our sales place. That's what Paul was also mentioning about. That's the platforms of intelligence or the customer experience or the planning aspects. So what we have done is we have taken from the sales place, then we have come to it from a core big bet and the digital next kind of areas, and then we have structured it along whether it's data related technology or customer experience related technology, or it is something horizontal, and that's how we have structured our whole training.
Sure, thanks, Balaji. That was quite informative and interesting as well. Shashwat, in view of what Balaji mentioned just now in terms of some of the focus areas for skilling, can you provide us your view on some of the competency and skill mapping initiatives that we are now undertaking and which are or in the offing from a DX perspective and the importance of that?
Yeah, if you just recapture the past 35 minutes, a consistent theme has been the expanding areas of competencies and technologies that we need to operate with, and hence it becomes very imperative to really start looking at our own resources, map them to certain competencies, and keep them updated on as they start on the learning journey. What are the new competencies, new skills that they're acquiring? That becomes very pivotal, because that is really the bedrock based on which we can chart out career roadmaps for our people, to map them to opportunities where their competencies are the best suited. So this is something that we are in the process of doing, and I'm hoping that in the next 2 weeks we will be launching something to capture this at a DX level, and then that kind of feeds into the development plan that they will have for the year. And this is something which as I was mentioning, we tried this with the snowflake mapping and identifying certain set of people, constructing the PDP to make sure that that is in their development plans. But I think the key to this is really what we're planning to do over the next 2 weeks to capture and map, and that kind of times well with the the appraisal related goal setting process that is running at this point. So that's the plan with us.
Sure, thanks, Shashwat. Suji, can I call on you to end this segment by giving us your views on the importance of some of the organization-wide processes that we have, for example, the PDPs. I know that at times we do not necessarily give them the due focus. We don't give those processes the due focus that it requires, but they're extremely critical in this journey of competency development and considering where we want to go as an organization. So, can you comment on some of the importance of some of these organizational processes and how we should really narrow down our focus on building competencies that have a business impact? If you could just help to sum up with your views.
Sure, sure, I'll do that. And as always, I'm a firm believer that all of us should always approach anything with an outcome in mind, right? What is it that we are after? So I will give you, and it's interesting what COVID has done, right? COVID has actually pushed all of us to force and think in a particular where we have stayed away from, right? So let's look at what's happening in the industry today. You have engineering startups who are actually who's used to making 3D printers, right? That's a next gen kind of thing. They're changing their entire mix to be able to create valves for ventilators, correct? You actually have beer makers and distillers actually change their production line to be able to really adapt and make hand sanitizers, correct? Because that's the need of the hour. That's what is required. And it has a larger humanity scale. It has a larger economic scale. And I would like to bring that mindset in the way we need to think about our people processes. And that's what we are trying to do across, correct? And coming to the context of everything that we're discussing now, right? Bringing and learning agility is one of our moments of truth, right? But learning agility cannot remain as a process. It has to be linked to an outcome. So as a result, what we have done, and if you look at the goal setting process, what is it that we have tried to do, or what is it that we are trying to do, is to be able to first define what are my role expectations, right? If I look at a data scientist, if I look at a data architect, if I'm really looking at it as a data engineer, the other part of it is the organization processes. Like I mentioned, we do not have a behavioral and a technical competency framework, which is a fundamental bedrock when you look at any people processes. And that's something that we are working on, and I'm hopeful and I'm very confident actually that by end of November, we should be able to have that in place so that it links to the roles and being able to create an agile workforce, because you need that so that people have predictability of how do I need to invest in my development, right? So now when you think about PDP, it has not necessarily, and when you look at data, right, because I always fall back on data, it has not necessarily been leveraged by the organization. And there are good reasons for it, because there's no structure that you can actually say, what do I need to train people on? How do I measure that impact? So we have put that as a part of the goal setting process with the attempt, like Saswat mentioned, if the business and all of you can actually, when I say you, the people who are part of this discussion, use this opportunity to put in what is it that you need to be successful in your roles, right? We talked about core, we talked about big bang. Think about it. If you think about the digital experience part, if you think about the data part, if you think about the CX, which is a foundation part, if you think about intelligent planning and trade, which is another element of it, but it's not so much the skill. And I think Saswat spoke about and Balaji spoke about it, saying, yes, we are talking about 80 hours of learning and it gives you the ability, but that's not what how you should look about it, right? We talked about gamification. So in my mind, gamification is possibly just one piece of the puzzle, right? You can still achieve your outcome if you don't have gamification. It just makes your user experience better, but it still doesn't take away that responsibility of you owning that process to say, this is what my PDP opportunity gives. This is where I want to go. Having those conversations. And that's where the goal setting opportunity, the quarterly performance feedback conversations, some of these elements of how do you necessarily link the learning competencies and skills, taking that responsibility to go to people and ask that information. Tell me what is it that I need to be trained on. And having the ability to have those courageous conversations with your manager saying, tell me what is it that I need to invest in myself, which is the projects that I need to really work towards. I think that's where the shift of the people processes, conversations, Ritesh, as the HR business partner for this business, I will leave it with you to be able to drive it with the leaders and the people to make it happen.
Thank you so much for that, Sachi. That was really insightful. And we now come to the final segment. We seem to be doing well on time. We are now into the Q&A session. I have a question. So I would encourage all of you to use this opportunity, considering the kind of panelists that we have, to please address your questions either on the chat window or raise your hand. We'll try to bring you on so that you can be heard. I have a question here which has come from Paul himself, which is to Suchi, and which is, in your estimate, Suchi, what is the relevance of collaboration as a core competency for the modern workforce? And can you give us some suggestions on what are the ways in which we can grow collaboration among teams?
Sure. The first part of the question, I think in my mind, this competency, this behavioral attribute is possibly has gained much more prominence in the current environment. It was always there, but I think right now it has become far more prominent. And I think what's become important is to be able to really see it in what context is that word collaboration used. So what are the behavioral indicators that need to be linked to this collaboration as a competency, right? And that needs to be really looked at based on roles. So which is the individual contributor roles, or if you look at a team leader role, or if you look at somebody who's actually building a practice, what is the value that you want to bring in your role? And how you want to take that competency and display it in your behaviors becomes extremely important. And that's a responsibility each of us have. So in my mind, that is possibly one important driver. And I'll tell you why. Because if we are actually trying to drive efficiency and effectiveness, nobody can do it alone, because each of our processes or each of our deliverables is an input process outcome ratio, correct? And our ability to be able to think from that perspective. So it is not about really creating empires. It is really about thinking of an outcome, saying what result that we want to drive. So, and I think it is also about bringing in a certain sense of responsibility as to how do I collaborate, correct? Because when I'm collaborating, I also need to bring in certain value, because people will ask for me if I'm able to project that value. And that becomes an individual responsibility in each one of us to be able to be clear, what value do I bring? What competency do I bring? So that I am able to present my value prop to somebody that I need to collaborate with. So having clarity of that at a business level, at an individual role level is an extremely important one, right? Now, Ritesh, the second part of the question was, just repeat that question one more time, please, so that I'm able to address it appropriately.
The second part, Suchi, was, what are some of the good ways to grow collaboration among teams? What are some of those initiatives, measures? Yeah.
Okay. So there are 2 or 3 ways that we can actually do this. One, very clearly, in terms of when we are taking on a project, right? And specifically, if you're looking at a Agile project, cross service line projects, I think it's important to be able to actually identify the areas that would require that collaboration, right, upfront, and being able to actually tie in to say it's only when this is the outcome that I want to achieve through collaboration, and consciously agree to that and work towards that outcome, then it becomes far more tangible and meaningful. That's one way of doing it, through project-based approach. The other way, from a collaboration standpoint, to look at it, which is more at a group level or at a team level. And the example that I would share is, what is the outcome that will suffer if I do not collaborate? It's like taking a Pareto's principle approach, saying it's my risk versus the impact that I want to create. And again, through conversations, through team meetings, brainstorming conversations, to be able to really look at it and say, what is the business that I would have if I'm actually able to collaborate? So these are 2 simple ways that we can implement in our project environment itself, in our day-to-day stand-up meetings, project meetings, to be able to bring this in a tangible way and make an impact.
Sure, thank you, Suchi. And maybe if I could just add on to that, a forum like this, a digital day like this, I mean, I think this itself is a forum where we are trying to showcase the competencies that we have. We're trying to gain a mutual respect for the work that everyone is doing. I think a day like this itself is something that enables and encourages collaboration. We have initiatives like Showcase in DX, where we bring in people who are experts in particular areas. We get them to showcase their work, their technologies, and all of this is with the perspective of building that mutual respect for what the other is doing. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to add just from my side.
And share success stories, because it's important to share success stories and risks, right? And that's where I think getting mind share of people, where people can understand, saying it's through collaboration that we were successful, right? Or if we didn't collaborate this, or if we could have collaborated, we could have done better. Sharing those success stories become extremely important.
Sure. Thank you, Suchi. Vinay, can I request for you to let me know if there are other questions, or if there's anyone who wants to just come on live and ask a question?
Yeah, sure. There is one more question that has come. It's how will the trainings be organized for certain competencies like mule ESB based on employee nominations, or is it some other pattern?
Yeah, so let me take that question, and that's an important one. The entire learning process will go two ways. And again, it is going to be based on, it's a business outcome. What is it that we want to drive? Yes, the personal aspirations always, and I'm going to be truthful to you, transparent to you, because you need to think about it in the right way so that we are able to set the right expectations. Learning that we are going to invest in is always with a business outcome in mind. In the whole process, we learn, right? So as a result, it will always going to be nomination driven as well as open enrollment. And that's where I think conversations with the leaders, conversations with your managers to be able to say, where do I necessarily invest in? How do I learn? Having those conversations is extremely important. So you have visibility to which are the learnings that are nomination based and which are open enrollment based. So when Balaji talks about like access to plural sites, so that's where the process of saying, okay, it is something that you are going ahead and doing your own learning, but it is also coming through a direction from the business to say you belong to the skill category. And this is where your interest possibly lies. And that's where when you're talking about a strength-based performance management system or a strength-based process becomes so powerful to say, I am energized by something. And if there is a business element that is associated with it, that takes a priority. So you necessarily raise your hand up saying, I would want to be skilled. The other way is this business finds that this is where you belong, and the business comes and tells you, saying, go ahead and cross skill or upskill yourself. So it will work both ways. And then it comes together to be able to say, based on a business priority, whether we are going to actually create it in a small target group of population and implement the learning, or we are going to open up the enrollment across the business because that's a priority skill that we would want for a larger segment of our population to be trained on. And when Balaji looks at a core and a big bets, that's another good way of looking at it.
Sure, thanks, Suji. We have a couple of questions more. So this one is directed, I think, primarily for towards Balaji. I'm sorry, I'm not able to see it on my chat window, so I'm just taking help here on the side to get those questions. Uh, so Balaji, the question predominantly is how do we gain access to platforms such as Pluralsight? This is coming from Saurabh Jain. So do you want to help us understand that, Balaji?
Yeah, so basically, from a plural site perspective, what we had is this was a kind of enterprise license, and that was actually divided into three different service lines. And as part of that, we got access to the 63 numbers. What we did is for this 63 numbers, we took the uh, we had a discussion with the delivery leaders, both Mohan and Amitabh, and then we decided from a business perspective who is going to get into what kind of projects and who needs to be trained. And like what Suchi mentioned, it was purely from a business perspective. We decided that we are looking at this person to be trained on this particular technology and get into this kind of engagement. So based on that, let's go ahead and nominate this person and skill. So this was more like in the nomination category, and that's because I think the plural site license was expected to get over by October 31st. So we had to take the nomination route here. But
Sure.
of course, yeah.
Please go ahead, Balaji.
Yeah, we are also looking at enabling the others who are left out of plural site through other platforms. That's still in work, and again we have a detailed plan. It's just that we are trying to put it at each individual level, like what Saswat was mentioning about. So I think there will be coverage across the spectrum for most people, from a training and digital.
Sure, thanks. This question is to Shashwat and Balaji, and it is from Shanti. It says, as we have, as we are trying to streamline with the latest data technologies, will we get an opportunity to the one in which we aspire to have a role, as we are all upskilling in the learning curve? So maybe I'll start off with Shashwat, and move to Balaji. If you need me to read out the question again, please let me know.
Yeah. So absolutely, and I think if you again go back to the last 20 minutes, we talked about skill and competency mapping, and that essentially means that as we upskill, as we get new skills, and they are obviously aligned to the general direction in which we are going, and that is really the first step to enable us to map the right people for the right opportunities. So the answer to your question is yes, that is the intent and that is the direction in which we are going.
Sure. Thanks, Shashwat. Balaji, do you have any comments on that?
I go with what Saswat mentioned. It is based on the skill mapping and the competency mapping, and if people aspire for a different technology, as long as it is in alignment with our business needs and our focus areas, I think we have provided a level of flexibility in that space. I think there have been people who have come back even from a plural side perspective. For example, they were asked to actually work totally on the mobile apps as the mandatory courses, and then we went. Then they told that they have been more in the CRM space. So we went ahead. We spoke to the plural side team and got them access to the CRM related courses. So I think we try to accommodate aspirations as far as possible, as long as it's in alignment with our core focus areas and business needs.
I'd
Sure,
just
thank
like to
you.
add one thing for everybody, right? And thank you, Shanti, for asking that question. Your responsibility, when I say yours, it is all of you, all of us, is to be able to make sure that you're using the right processes in place to be able to document that and have those conversations with your managers and insist that it is documented and recorded, correct? And that's where you should take the opportunity as a part of the goal setting process, which is happening right now, right? To have those conversations, make sure that your PDP is actually reflecting that. And in the goal setting process, as you know, there is a process which actually talks about a goal setting acknowledgement and the ways to actually record what is it that you want to do. Do that, because that is the only way that you will take responsibility to be able to say, this is what I want, and go all the way. Because it is also, like we said, it is, see, sometimes it is also about pushing the bar, right? The business reality will always be there. But are you doing enough on your part? Just going beyond saying, I want to be skilled, but making it happen for yourselves. So go up, have those courageous conversations, and make sure that you are doing your bit to actually realize your aspirations.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Suchi, Shashwat, and Balaji. I have a final question here. It's also more like a comment, so I'll just read it out. It's quite nice. It comes from Tabatso. He says, do you think that people could be motivated by knowing they are valued when they are shown clear communication and employee friendliness, aligning it with strong management and leadership, as well as holding people accountable? Do you think it creates a strong chain of workmanship? I would say absolutely. I think all of the panelists would concur as well. And as we're just exactly on the dot of the hour, so thank you so much once again, Suchi, Shashwat, and Balaji, and to all of you for participating and for your questions. Have a great day ahead.
And it is, thank you for moderating the session so well. I'm sure through this, we have spent good time getting insights from everybody. So thank you all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Suchi.
Thank you.
Thank you.